So in this video, we're going to resume our clock app, and we're going to be making sure our label shows up in the right place and getting it to show its first time. So to start with, if you remember from our last video, when we went to the simulator, it's not in a great place. It's not in the center, and that's part of why um, it's not in the center here. So to because Apple has many devices, iPads, iPhones, and they all have different screen sizes. So we can't actually choose specific X and Y values because that causes issues because if you want something centered in an iPad, it might be like 800 values in, but if you want it centered in an iPhone 7, it might be 300 values in. So that doesn't work at all. So Apple developed in the last, I think, like 6 years ago or something, this conceptual auto layout. And with auto layout, we place constraints on various views within other views and stuff like that, relative to other views. So that way we can, let's say we can put a constraint on a label to make it centered. So that's what we're going to do right now. And to do that, there are a couple of ways, and we're going to be going through most of the ways to put constraints. And different situations just have different ways. But my favorite is right click. So I have a mouse right now, so I got to right click. But if you are using the trackpad of your computer or you don't have a mouse, it would be control click on a Mac. A control click is the same as right click. So what I did, I right clicked on this label here. I right clicked and I dragged it, like diagonally. And these are all the constraints that pop up when I let go, because I'm constraining this view to this view, this view to this view. And in this view, because it's inside the view, it's this view acts like a container for this view. So when you put something in a container and constrain it, you have container constraints like center horizontally. So let's click center horizontally. So now you see it's red and it's not going to show up at all, like if we were to run the app right now. And that's because we gave it, as soon as you give it a constraint, its X and Y value doesn't matter. Like I could put it here, it would be the same exact thing. So this is the constraint we gave, this line. We say it has to be over here. So if we were to move it, you see this number is how far off we are from where it has to be. So this is fine because we're good with this. And let's say we need to give it a Y value, right? So the other way of making a constraint is down here. This add new constraints button is a little square within two lines, and you click it and you have all of the current surrounding constraints right now. Like if you were to constrain it right now to the top, you would see 110 because this value is 110. And then if you wanted a leading space, this is leading on the left side, you would have 134. And then on the right side, you have 121. And see, these values are not exactly pixels, but they're Apple's unit of measurements, usually called points. And so let's say we want to constrain it from the top because we already gave it an X constraint. So if we were to use one of these constraints, it would actually be conflicting with the X constraint we just gave it of being horizontally centered. So we're going to give it a top constraint, and to do that we just click this red line like this, and then we say add constraint at the bottom. And so now it's happy. It turned from red to yellow, and what yellow means is that, so if I drag it anywhere, remember where you drag it? It doesn't matter at all after you put it a constraint. So this little bounded rectangle right here is what you see where the label will actually be when it renders. And when you have lots of views and you've just put a bunch of constraints and you want to see where they actually go, you just hit this update frames button down here, and it'll go to where it will end up being. So now if we run this on an iPhone 7, it'll look great, and it'll be exactly where we want it to be. If we were to run it on an iPad, it would be the same 110 from the top and centered horizontally. So there you see it. It's working the way we want it to. Great. So So now we're going to start linking this to some code. And to do this, we want to make a little room on our screen, get rid of the view hierarchy, get rid of this section down here. Yeah. Okay, so when we want to when we want to add code to our UI, we pull up the assistant editor down here. I didn't talk about this in the last tour of Xcode video, but right now we're in the standard editor. When we open up the assistant editor, which is this middle one, we open it up and we see two editors. The standard editor is still here, but we have the assistant editor on the right. And Xcode has some pretty good automatic detection of where you'd want, which file you'd actually want to have open while you have this view open. So it'll open up the view controller up here. This is the same as if we just went here. So right now we're back in Storyboard, and we have the view controller for this view. This entire thing has a view controller, and this is our custom class. We could have called this clock view controller or something like that. But first what we're going to do is make something called an outlet. So an outlet is, it's like if you haven't seen the previous videos and you don't know very Swift basics, I suggest you go back and look at those. But an outlet is a variable in reference to a UI component. So we can so to make an outlet, just like when you're making a constraint, you right-click and drag, or control-click drag, into your code, actually. And variables, by convention, they don't go, in the middle of your code. They go at the top of your code, like we would have done in our last few videos. You put them at the top. But it doesn't actually matter exactly where you put it. So if you see this, we have outlet. And we're going to call, this is going to be our variable name in reference to this label. So how about we call it clock label? And so that's easy as that, and it'll make the variable reference for us. So we have it here, and now we're actually going to mess with it a little. And if you remember from our last videos, when we have variables, they contain objects, and when we have objects we can actually reference them and mess with their values. So the variable here is clock label, and it's of type the class UI label, and UI label has a text property. And if you should know properties from the last few videos. So you have this property, and we can assign it to something because it's essentially just a variable within this other variable. So when we have a text, we can say, let's assign it to some string. Remember, we know what a string is. So current time, let's call it that. So now if we run this, and remember, I typed this in the view.load, and the view.load gets called every time before a view appears. So if you're changing screens on your phone, maybe you're in Facebook, and you click on someone's profile, and you'll see a push to another screen with their profile. But right before that push even begins to animate, it has to call view.load on that other screen to load up the UI components of that screen, and then it'll push, and then we have a view will appear. That's another function that we could have added, and then as soon as it finishes animating, it'll say view did appear. So we'll be working with those a bit more, but as you see, we never saw this 000 anymore. We just went straight to current time because view.load is called before it even happens, before we see anything. So to figure out more about that, we can see when it's actually showing up by printing. Okay, so now if we print this and we run it again, I'm running it again. Remember, Command R to run. So I'm running, and now we see something. We see a print view.load. You'll notice that you can't really tell which one happened first because it happens so quickly. But now we have our first time showing up, which is pretty cool. So then the next thing we're going to do is show some basic time, but Actually, I think we're going to put that into the next video, because this video we covered nice basics of labels, outlets, and how that all relates to our functions and variables that we learned in the past few videos. So thanks, and I'll see you next time.